I'm Kiera Morgan. Thanks for joining me for Coffee with Kiera. We are sponsored by the Human Being in Newport and Lincoln City. And me today, I'm very excited to have La-Tanga Hopes, and she is with FEMA, and they've been doing a lot of great work in Lincoln County and helping out our folks who have been hit by those wildfires. Thank you, La-Tanga, for joining me today. I really appreciate it. First of all, can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and about FEMA?
Yes. I would love to. I've been with the FEMA organization for about 3 years. I work as a reservist. And I guess what I would like to share more than anything else is the opportunity to be able to share and encouraging information, because I work in the External Affairs Department. So we are constantly doing outreach. My job and my specialty involves providing information that can provide survivors with support, details for how they can start their recovery process. And if they are still in the response category, we can tell them where they can find resources to get them started to get to the recovery process. And that's pretty much the long and short of what I do. And it's wonderful because it just so happens to be a positive message.
That's great. And of course, FEMA is the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And
correct.
I like to say that in Oregon, we are fortunate that we don't have to deal with the natural disasters like they have in other areas of the United States. But it just so happens that we got hit. It's 2020 after all.
Times are changing. The good thing about the Federal Emergency Management Agency and what people should equate with FEMA is that we provide support and help for disasters that's before, during, and even after the disaster. Most people think that we are merely a response agency, but a lot of times that we utilize mitigation, which is something that's it's effective. It helps you prepare for that day where it may not happen often. So we'll talk about the HAZ mitigation teams that's out here that's also providing some support as well. We'll get to that in a minute, but I just wanted to make sure I tagged that we definitely provide you with support even before the disaster comes.
That's very important. Thank you. So we want to get the message out there. There's some deadlines coming up for folks. Let's talk a little bit about that and what that entails.
It's a big deadline. So as you mentioned, we've been here working, and we've had these external outreach sites. They've been open right after the disaster since we've come. Were established so that people could physically walk in and say, I need help. I don't even know where to start. There are people that are there to assist you. They're going to be closing.
Oh.
The date for that is November 16th. So it's
say that one more time, it cut out.
Corner, November 16th.
Oh my goodness.
Literally Monday is the last day for you to make it up in your mind that you think that you may have been impacted by this disaster and you should probably register. It doesn't mean that you need to commit to it, but by close of business, we will not have that availability anymore. And
now,
what will happen?
What are folks registering for? When they register, what is it that they will be potentially able to receive?
Okay. When you register with FEMA, we typically deal with individual and household support. So if an individual has been impacted by the disaster, or a household has been impacted by the disaster, you can come in and talk to one of our specialists. Let them know how your family or your household has been impacted, and we can provide you with support and let you know how our services can provide you with that recovery process so that you can get started. Now, there's a misnomer, and I'd like to share information about that. Most people think that if they have insurance, that FEMA cannot help them with replacing some of their items. There are some caveats to this process because, of course, we cannot do a double down and do a claim if you all have insurance. But sometimes there's maybe a 90-day process before, or a 30-day process, which would be the earliest, before you're able to get that gap taken care of between what your insurance will provide and you don't have a home. Should that be the case, you might ought to call our number, and I'll provide that for you in a minute, because what that will do for you is provide temporary housing or shelter, which is what I should use as a temporary shelter word, for those people who are waiting for their insurance to kick in. And there's some other categories that people with insurance may be able to contact FEMA and find that they can get support with. Let me give you that number. Again, the closing is going to be on November 16th. That's going to be on Monday, this Monday coming up after the weekend. And if you're wondering if you should apply for registration, if you've been impacted and if this message applies to you, 1-800-621-3362 is the number that you should call. And they can walk you through that process and let you know if this program may be for you.
And they can call that number anytime, is that correct? 24/7?
It's not a 24/7 number at this time. So you can call from 8 in the morning until I think it's 8 in the evening. And the number again is 1-800-621-3362.
And let's talk a little bit about a really exciting thing, and that is the Temporary Housing Recovery Program that Lincoln County has qualified for. Can you give us more information about that?
Keyword is qualified. What happens is FEMA tends to do research, and we have a really great team, and they find out what the need is firstly. And then, of course, we do everything on a case-by-case basis. And there are 3 other counties that are also involved in this, but ultimately what happens is they will look to find out what the need is in that county. And if there are people that are in need of direct temporary housing, and if it seems to be the case, they will provide an eligibility concept about what they can do to make available. It's a long-term housing process, because what you need immediately after the disaster is shelter and food. Mm-hmm. The first thing that we provide. And after you get the temporary shelter, you can then go into a direct situation where you can still have a temporary housing set up as opposed to a temporary shelter set up. And in those cases, it provides you with the ability to go from paying for shelter day to day. You can then move into more of a monthly type status. And that gives you some sense of home or residency. It may not be exactly what you're looking for, but it'll give you some semblance of that. And this was what we're hoping to be able to provide for survivors in your county.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. What I wanted to mention is that there is a qualification process, and it's very important that I mention that. Should you live in any of the counties which are already listed, Lynn, Jackson is one of them. Besides Lincoln, there's one more that you can do. It's Lynn, Jackson, Marion, and then now Lincoln. And if you live in one of those counties and you've been impacted by the disaster, which were the wildfires and the straight line winds, you may want to contact them, let them know what your current status is. That would be the 1-800 number, 621-3362. Let them know what your status is. They'll go through an eligibility process to find out what they might be able to support you with. And the more information that you provide about the impact that this disaster has had on you and your family possibly, then they can provide you with more information about how they can then support you in your recovery process.
So many of the folks that were impacted by those wildfires in Lincoln County were renters, renting from folks, and it was not necessarily low income, but workforce housing types.
Working class community. Mm-hmm.
Yes, trailers, things like that were being rented to families. Are those the folks that you are able to help, or just homeowners? Some people don't realize that you can help both, right?
That is correct. That is correct. So here's how our program works. If you should come in and you find out that the individual assistance program does not necessarily work for you, there's a small business association that we usually have that works side by side with us, and where if you don't necessarily qualify for things that would have to do with home ownership, there are other programs that you may qualify for within our programs that we have. And then we have a category which is called other needs. There's a program called critical needs. And these programs tend to be more humanistic as opposed to estate oriented. And so that means that you should still come in. And then again, you should also remember that we're not only focused on just providing federal support. We mentioned the MARC, which is the MARC. There is a multi-agency recovery center that will soon be coming to a few neighborhoods near you. And what you should know is that these programs, or I should say these centers, will be replacing the external outreach sites that are currently set up. And with these sites, what you will find is that they will provide a multi-agency outreach process. So not only will there be federal help, there will also be state help, and there will be local help. And what you will find with a lot of the local agencies is that there are volunteers that go far beyond what we are capable of doing with outreach to make sure that they can provide support for the working class community and just the average Joe that may need help in getting support. So where you may not necessarily get what you need federally, there may be other programs that can help you with your recovery.
I think that's really important for folks to know that you do work with other local agencies. You work with the Red Cross, you work with the state. You've been working with locally with Lincoln County as well to get the information.
That is correct.
Folks, right?
Mm-hmm. That is correct.
And so do you currently have these MARCs set up? Is it still at the factory outlet mall, or is that going to change?
That will be changing. So as I mentioned, right now, if you are going and seeking help, you will visit an external outreach center. And those sites are set up throughout I think we have some in all of the 8 counties. They're going to start closing. Here, let's go down the list. Because right now, these are if you think about all of the sites that's been set up, they start with, there's Clackamas County, there's Douglas, there's, Klamath, Lynn, Lane, Lincoln, and then Jackson and Marion. Those are all of the counties that have been impacted and deemed impacted by the disasters, which is the wildfire and straight line winds. If you live in any of those counties, you are encouraged to call the number before the registration deadline. The number that you will need to call is 1-800-621-3362. Call that number, first of all, to get started. And you want to do that soon because Monday is right around the corner. If you just so happen to live in one of the other counties that we've mentioned, which we've also outlined as Lynn, now Lincoln, Jackson, and Marion County, those are the places that have been targeted to be part of the direct temporary housing. And if you live in those counties and your shelter looks like it's going to be something that should be considered as long-term, you should still call that number because there may be support available for you there as well. There is an eligibility criteria, and they'll discuss those details with you.
And that's important because we've got a lot of folks that are currently staying in hotels or maybe only temporarily able to stay with friends or family. And we're already in a housing crisis in Lincoln County. How is that impacting these families that are now looking for a place to live?
Okay, so if there was like a pre-existing situation, I don't know if they would necessarily, well, I'm sure they wouldn't qualify for being impacted by the disaster. If that just so happens to double down on their impact, incidentally, when they speak with the caseworker, who will probably end up looking at their situation, they will then assess those details and find out, again, what the need is in order to help you start your path to recovery.
And you're also working with cleaning up the area where these disasters have hit in Lincoln County. And that means getting rid of hazardous waste and removing items. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Alrighty, so we're still in stage 1. There's 4 different categories that we are dealing with the recovery process. With stage 1, the thing that's most important that I think that most of your listeners will need to know is that if you have a home in these areas, and you probably have to be homeowner related, but still for the people that are looking to return to their homes, They would first need to make sure that they sign a disclaimer so that they can these people can have access to the property to first clean it up. Now, once they are able to access this property and get the cleanup done, you'll be able to safely return. But the sooner that you can get the disclaimer completed, the sooner they can get you back to your property. And that's really the first goal. There's one thing I'd like to mention, if it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
The price for this work that's being done, this really important work, it's covered by the state and the federal agencies. So there's no income that you need to not provide any type of money or anything out of the pocket for this courtesy that's being provided and this service. They will come and clean these areas up, and it's at no cost.
And the idea is to remove the hazardous waste so that it doesn't get into the landfills, so that it doesn't get into the streams and the watersheds, correct?
And the key word is hazardous. We want to make sure that the community is safe. We want to make sure that the county is safe. And then overall, as you mentioned, with the incidental secondary impact of it getting out into the community and turning into something else, it's better to deal with it on site in those areas and contain the issues there. So you are correct.
And is this something you guys have already started? Is that right?
That is correct. Well, matter of fact, we're that step one or stage one, which is what they'll call it. We're at the end at this moment for the debris removal process. And so if anybody, again, I'm going to use the 1-800 number and go back to that again. If you have questions about your community and your land or where you live as a renter, and you need to find out if you're able to return to your home and that the debris has not been cleared, get a hold of these people so that they can help walk you through the steps. Get you in contact with the people that you would need to speak with in order to have that expedited, because I know that they're closing this first stage out and they're going to be looking at this as a larger consensus very shortly. So this is something that you'd want to try to get expedited quickly.
Now you mentioned that this is stage one. Can you tell us what the other stages are?
They have 4 other stages that will continue. And as I mentioned, the first one is the personal property, where they go to the homes firstly. After they do that, they're then going to do a larger portion of it, which will involve the EPA, where they will come in and they're going to assess how they can then look at the community, figure out how, not necessarily where your home has been impacted, but how the community has been impacted, and they'll be doing a more thorough process of removal at that time. After that, they then go back again, and there are 2 other levels that are involved, but they're not on a personal note at that time. So the first step is to make sure that we get the personal and the property taken care of. And that would be the step that would probably be most important for your listeners. This one will be most impactful for them.
And is there anything else that you want to add about FEMA and your work in Lincoln County?
Again, I mentioned something about hazard mitigation, and I think that that's really important. As we begin the rebuilding process and the recovery process, FEMA, as we mentioned, does not necessarily mean response after a community has been impacted by a disaster. FEMA typically gets involved before, during, and after you've had this disaster in your community. And most people have no idea how to start pulling themselves together because that's why it's called a disaster. So the hazard mitigation team comes in, and what they can do is circumvent and help you prevent or prepare for the unexpected. And most of these things, when I think about hazard mitigation, one person had given me this one term, and I'd like to use it because it works really well. Tying your shoe can prevent a fall. And as simple as that is put, yeah. We do the same thing in communities and with personal property. These specialists will come in, look at your situation, tell you what the region that you live in may be prone to be subject to, and how you can prepare for the next should it come event, or how you could prepare for a disaster or anything that you may not have anticipated. One more thing I'd like to mention is because now that it's raining, And we're now getting into the flood season. And what happens is we'd like to make sure that there's another misnomer. After a disaster, particularly with fire, there are situations where areas where they're called burn marks, and the water does not necessarily saturate and go down into the gravel and all the rest of that stuff the way it would normally do had that area not had burn marks from, you know, a horrific fire. So what happens is the water just tends to run right down, in areas that would probably never flood in a million years would then have that tendency to do so. So we talk about flood insurance, and it's very important that you guys start thinking about that in the sense that it's plausible now that areas that would never have flooded before may now be subject to the possibility of flooding.
So it doesn't mean that you're necessarily right on a river. You can still be affected by flooding. At
this time, just simply because of the disastrous fires that have come through here. And what happens is you'd go, oh, well, like you said, I don't live near a river. I don't live near anywhere this place has never flooded before. Why would it flood now? If there's been fire in your community, there's a possibility that you could be impacted by flood. If it's raining and you have torrential rains and it just so happened to be the rainy season, this would be ideal. It's an ideal situation for you to consider, again, preparing, planning, and considering the possibility of flood.
Now, do most homeowners insurance, do they offer flood insurance now, or is it pretty much only available through the federal government?
So the federal government, of course, I would tell you, would probably be the way to go. It's a good deal. But not only is it offered by the federal government, there are some private insurances that will also provide you with flood insurance. I don't know the rules and the regulations for theirs, but I know that we have a pretty good deal as far as when the contract starts. After you sign up for it and everything, I know that we offer a very good deal, and you may want to compare the details for those because I don't have anything to kind of juxtapose that with. But if you call the 1-800 number, or you can look us up online, disasterassistance.gov, and you can find information about the flood program. And it's nationwide. So with them, of course, you know, with the more people that you have in the program, the more competitive rates that can be offered for you. Mm-hmm. So they make a difference in comparison to the private insurance, but you have that freedom, that liberty to do the comparison and find out what works best for you. But do consider looking into that as an option right now during this rainy season.
But it is important for folks to make sure that they have a plan in place. They have a go bag, that they have a radio. And I want to point out that it's really important where radio is concerned, because sometimes radio stations can go off the air due to circumstances beyond their control. So it's important that you keep dialing till you get to a station, right?
That is correct. And believe it or not, we will tell you, it's funny how this works. On some levels, they would say, don't rely on your cell phone because you may not necessarily have service. But on the other hand, there are some social media networks where we've had disasters where people were able to communicate with their family members via social media and say, I'm okay. You know, mm-hmm. You just want people to know that you're okay, or I do need help. I do need this, that, or the other. I haven't heard from this person. So make sure that you do have the radio. Make sure that you have emergency contact numbers. Make sure that you have an escape plan and you do have a go back. Those are the first things that you need to prepare for, because if you were to tell these people that there was going to be a fire and they were going to need to evacuate at a moment's notice, and they would probably go, oh, that wouldn't happen in this area. But if you anticipate the idea that such an event could possibly happen, and you could just simply go and pick your bag up, and you had an extra phone there that was already charged, you had your radio, maybe a couple of blankets, and some water available to you, the transition of recovery would not be as shocking, mm-hmm. Probably as devastating as it would if you were just caught with keys in your hand and no shoes on and nothing to wear tomorrow because I didn't anticipate this. So being prepared is key. And we would like for survivors to know that.
All right. La-Tanga, anything else that you want to add as we wrap up?
I'd love to be able to come back as we continue with the direct temporary housing, so that we can share more information, because there is progress being made. And I'm sure that there's going to be questions subsequently. So as you get questions and we continue corresponding, I hope that maybe we can conceptualize a message that is useful for your audience and provide some tools that they can use to continue with their help. This is beautiful. I've had the opportunity in my driving around just to appreciate your beautiful state. And I'm happy to be a part of this process of recovery with you all. And what a nice bunch of people you all have been. I'm very happy to be here helping you.
Thank you so much. And we will continue to keep people informed as this progresses, and letting people know what options are available for them and how you're there to help. And again, advocate for preparedness in the event of a disaster.
Thank you
for joining me on Coffee with Kiera, sponsored by The Human Being, located in Newport on Highway 101 and 6th Street, and in Lincoln City at the north end of the city on the west side of the highway next to TLC Credit Union. Thanks for joining me on Coffee with Kiera for Pacific Northwest News and Entertainment. I'm Kiera Morgan.